So that would be a negative.
Is bloody okay?
Bloody's okay. But anything past bloody, we gotta say.
We get 5.
Yes, you did.
Books make it. Sadness.
I spilled my water.
Her water broke.
So now I don't have enough water to drink.
Here,
Bloody legend. Bloody legends. Is it cold?
Sound like cold. No, you need colder, don't you?
I have hot water.
She spills the water and then she's like, no, that's not cold.
She just doesn't appreciate me.
Oh, thank you. People are so nice.
Notice the 8th on books shirt.
Welcome, everybody. We are at the Trope-alicious panel with a whole bunch of LitRPG authors. We are here to talk about what is a trope and why we're using them. We are doing the foundation, Arthritis Foundation donations. We are also asking that you rate us at the end so we can keep these panels going in the future. The higher the ratings, the more ratings we get, the better rooms, the better time slots, and everything we're going to get for these panels. So, whether you like us or not, give us a 5. If you don't, if we're not worth a 5, just tell us why we're not worth a 5, and I can still give us a 5. Just like fill it out on Amazon review.
I like the book. It was well done. 4. This person should go to jail.
Yeah, exactly.
Best book I ever read in my life.
Yeah,
That's a 1 star.
I love that. The book this book saved my life. 4 stars.
So, we're going to give the panelists a minute to talk about themselves, give us a little bit about who they are, what they write, and then we'll go into questions.
Hi guys, I'm Dakota Krout. You may know me as that person who's a 1-star review that says this guy has too many 5-star reviews, so I'm trying to balance it out. And I read a whole bunch of books, and the one I have up here is Something, so if you're looking for something to read, I have something for you. And at the end, if you would like something as an audiobook, I have a free QR code for anyone who wants the audiobook, so you can just have it straight to your email. Find me. I also own and run No Press, and so we are a company focused on LitRPG cultivation and game of the titles, and that is all we are ever going to focus on with our direct sales.
And he uses spreadsheets.
A lot. For everything.
Well, for everything and something I didn't do
What a plug.
I'm JP Valentine, also known as the guy who was a 1-star Amazon review for having too much swearing in my book called This Quest is Bullshit. I write LitRPG and cultivation and progression fantasy, most recently Stargazer's War, book 2 of which came out on Friday.
All right, my name is Shami Stovall, Shami like a car cloth. I was nominated for a Dragon Award this year. I write LitRPG, fantasy, sci-fi. I say this, but I don't actually. I wish I had a really funny 1-star. All of mine are just depressing, you know? And I try not to read them, so I don't have a really funny one for you, but woo.
My name is Seth. I write LitRPG, Valentine, Farmer, Novatera, all that stuff. I have no 1-star reviews, so maybe you guys can help me out. Yeah.
1 star. Requested this review as
I also often make bad decisions, so let's not do that.
1 star. Makes bad decisions.
Oh, is it my turn? I'm Hanna. I write. I write LitRPG. I write something online, like System Reset Overdue. I forgot the name of my book. And my favorite review is that this book is a circle jerk for moms. So, okay. You think that's an insult? Good. We used it in promotion on Mother's Day.
My name is Steve Bollier. I write as Jaime Castle. I own Athon Books, but you might better know me as the guy who left that review on Dakota Krout's book. I own Athon Books. We specialize in LitRPG, fantasy, science fiction. Happy to be here. Happy to talk tropes. Now we're taking pictures, so we're just I won't kill time.
So we're also going to push that everybody puts their mouth closer to their mic because it's getting it. If we're videotaping, it's going to be harder to hear you guys.
He said videotaping, as if this is the 90s taping, ladies.
Yeah, you heard that right. So we're here to talk about tropes. The first question is, what is a trope? A lot of people confuse tropes and genres. So what are we looking at? What is the definition of a trope for you guys?
Webster's dictionary. No. You looking at me?
Yeah, sure. You jumped in, so now you get to finish.
I was just making a joke. A trope is a specific element of a book that hits the market in a way that the readers are expecting for that particular genre. Like you said, it is different from a genre, right? Like in LitRPG, we have a lot of things like animal companions, or are they overpowered? Are they, pass.
To sort of piggyback on that, tropes are those high-level things, but then it's the expectations that seeing something sets. So animal companions is great. This person is going to have an animal companion. The readers are immediately going to have association with what that means for the story. And so a trope is the fulfillment of those expectations, or the subversion of those expectations.
Yeah, I was going to say there are common themes or motifs in a story that you can immediately recognize, and it's different from a cliche because it hasn't yet been overused. It becomes a cliche when you see it everywhere. If every book had an animal companion, right? Not everyone does, so.
I think that just about covers it. I would tack on that a genre is largely made of a bunch of tropes, effectively.
So in regards to that, when do you guys pick what tropes you're going to be writing? Do you do that during the base system setting creation, or do you let that generally flow throughout the stories you write?
So if in the previous book I wrote the trope from cell A2, I moved down to cell A3 on the spreadsheet. No, so typically what I would do is, absolutely, when I'm first writing the outline of the book, I'm going to put in major tropes or major themes that I'm going to have throughout the book, things that I want to hit, open loops that I want to close later in the series, all sorts of fun things like that, because even if no one else sees them, it kind of hits the subconscious that it's there, right? People like to have that resolution, and so I like to have that planned ahead of time so that they will be resolved.
And then he puts them in a spreadsheet.
Yes. Or starts the spreadsheet.
I come across my tropes generally by accident. They tend to be brainworms that appear from something I've read or watched or otherwise come across that I get some idea for a variation on or might even take on, and inevitably finds its way into whatever I write, usually that day.
I am a big advocate for writing things that you're passionate about. So if I love a trope, I'm going to love the hell out of it in my own books, right? The animal companions, I love. So I always pitch my series as Pokemon meets Harry Potter because everybody gets an animal companion. Like that's a trope I love, so we're gonna see it everywhere, from every angle, right? So yeah, I pick the ones that I'm passionate about, and I know from the beginning what I'm gonna be writing, so I'm excited to use them.
Like Shami, I don't, I only use tropes that I want to read. And so, for me, I'm not a planner. I pants pretty much everything.
No spreadsheets.
No spreadsheets. Looking at spreadsheets gives me headaches.
As they should.
So a lot of times my tropes emerge because as a reader, it feels like what's correct in the story at that moment. And then as I'm going through a book, I'm building out sort of a library of tropes, and I'm then getting to answer the question, do I fulfill this or do I subvert this all the way through? But I don't start with anything particular in mind except OPMC, because everything I write is OPMC.
Okay, so piggybacking off that, I really, really, really want to write an OPMC.
Do it.
And I kind of always miss. So for me, I love these tropes and I want to put them in my books, but I never quite hit them.
Your librarian is OP.
Yeah, but she's not OP enough. Like, she doesn't really fit. She doesn't quite fit that, just like it doesn't quite fit in the cozy genre or the slice of life genre.
Is any LitRPG protagonist ever OP enough?
No, they're not.
John from Valentine's fun.
But yeah, but not OP enough to even like to hit that OPMC, because she just isn't yet. But yeah, I have a lot of trouble with tropes. I love reading them, and I have trouble staying in the boundaries that define them when I write my own work, because the story carries away, my character's like, hey, look, I know you wanted to do this, but I think we should do this. And then it gets away, and I'm like, oh, quick, I have to backtrack and get back to the actual story.
And 4 books become 6.
It was actually 7. Yeah.
I think everyone up here is actually saying something similar, and that is we are, as writers, I think good writers tend to find their tropes. It is okay to start with a trope, but I feel like Dakota, I think, said he starts with a trope, but Dakota's a phenomenal writer, so those tropes are going to come out. I like to think more thematically. 75% of your book should be theme, and so those themes run through the whole book. I mean, that's a general statement, 75%, whatever, but everything should come back to the theme of the book, right? I just wrote a music-themed LitRPG that's coming out on October 15th with Brett and my business partner, Nathan, and throughout the book, you're like, hey, are we hitting on the music thing enough? These things get carried away as you're writing, and you always kind of have to remind yourself of that trope or of that theme or whatever it is. But if you're a good writer, hopefully those things naturally play themselves into that story you're writing. Unless you're like Seth, who writes 37 series at a time, and you forget who your main character is. Right.
That segues almost perfectly into the next question. About how much of your book are you actually focusing on that trope? Or is it more of an organic as the book goes along, which is just kind of there?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start here. I just said what,
Yeah.
Yay! Katie.
Yes. No, it really is. It just like you have this idea, and well, for me, and I have squirrel brain, so the idea it splintered together, and it just the tropes, the idea of the tropes that I'm trying to stick to is still there. I'm trying to put in my story because of reader expectations, but I have a lot of trouble wrangling them in properly with my story and my characters, so they get there. They're just not usually what people are expecting, which is wrong.
I don't really think about them very much. I tend to just write and see what happens. I often find that I think about them more when my story becomes boring. So as soon as I stop enjoying what I'm doing and stop enjoying the experience of discovering what the story is, I often find that my problem is in the tropes. It's in the themes as well, right? I'm not fulfilling the promises that I made to myself at the beginning of the book when I read the words that I wrote. And so I don't tend to think about much when I'm writing.
So we often say we are not our characters.
Right.
Right? But our characters are us.
Right.
right? It's the opposite. We're not writing what we believe necessarily. Like, you're not going to get preached at necessarily in our books, but like our characters become us, and we start to think like those characters while we're writing these books. And so if your character is a farmer or a friggin' fisherman, like, you know, you're going to start to think that way, and hopefully if you're thinking that way, those tropes and themes just naturally progress through your story.
Yeah, I think
Or a murder hobo. I don't know.
that's, yeah, I think that where tropes for me are super helpful is in fixing problems. It's shorthand for me to look at my story and say, oh man, this isn't quite as interesting as I thought, or there hasn't been enough excitement, or I'm slowing down in a way I don't like, or I've gone a direction I don't like. Okay, let me look through the previous however many chapters that I've already written. Let me understand what this is telling the reader, and let me figure out why this particular thing that I've just written feels like a deviation to me, right? So tropes are that great shorthand for understanding expectation ahead of time.
I guess I'm the exact opposite of Seth. I really like to outline and plan and plot. And when I like a trope, I'm just going to stick with the, animal companion, familiar type of trope because I did it to death. I mean, I worked it into the world itself. I wanted to use it everywhere. So where would I find these creatures? How would people get the creatures? What kind of magic do the creatures grant? What are the power levels of the creatures? Like, what are we talking about in terms of scale? What's the weakest one? What's the strongest one? I thought about all that ahead of time before I even started writing the book because I love it so much. It was such a passion. It was not a chore to think about the world. It wasn't a chore to think of interesting creatures and what kind of magics they can have and, make my own 151, beforehand. This was all fun for me. So I really liked having that framework before I started writing because I feel like it does help me. Every writer, I'm sure, gets to this point where they're like block or they've been writing and they're like, wow, this chapter went nowhere. What was I doing? But when I go back to my outline and I go back to my notes and I see all my passion that I already gave myself from the past, right? I'm like, wow, I have some more ideas here. I'll take one of my ideas that I had and put it in there. So when I use tropes, I try to infuse it into the story. Maybe that's the theming, like Steve said, that's the theme. The theme is we're going to have animal companions, right? So it helps me a lot.
I find my stories tend to grow somewhat organically, and I find in tropes less a guide, less something that is a way to stick to a theme so much as a tremendous source of inspiration for what comes next, what is looking forward. If I ever find myself kind of uncertain of what should happen next, where the story should go, I can look to a trope, to an animal companion, to just about anything and see, okay, how can I introduce this in an interesting new way? How can this play into the book in a way that it hasn't played into other books yet, or that would fit in with the theme? How can I alter the trope to fit in with the theme? That's how I use tropes largely, looking forward as opposed to looking holistically or looking backwards.
So kind of branching out on that a little bit is, I had a startling realization a minute ago, I wrote it down, because I realized that to this point all of my companions are edible. I hadn't even thought about that before, but so in Ritualist we have Coffee Mate, which is edible. In Cooking with Disaster I have a dog that's also a watermelon, and his whole goal in life is to get killed and eaten. In this, I even have Cookie, right? So it's a weapon, so it's not really edible.
Do you write when you're hungry?
Yeah, kinda. So there's that. But it's just one of those things that I'm realizing. Even now, I'm learning more about my own books, like and tropes that I'm using, even without realizing it. So it's really cool because I have a lot of planned things, but then there's also it comes back to the author's individual style and the tropes that they design for themselves for their own specific brand. And so even when people are saying like, oh, I'm just gonna see what happens, even that can kind of sometimes be a trope that you are designing into your own book, right? So a lot of people in Mountaindale have heard this one before, but what do we call an author that has their own style? No?
Oh.
John's spot. It's successful is what we were going
Oh,
for.
okay.
Yeah, you guys have
I was
heard that
waiting for a
before.
pun,
Yeah.
Dakota.
You've heard it before. It's just putting you on the spot.
I didn't have the mic.
Successful. Oh yeah, great. Thanks, Nick. But yeah, so that's just one of those things. Is like we have tropes. We all have something that makes our work wholly unique. So that's really cool.
And that was literally going to be my next question is, tropes have a relatively defined expectation that the readers get from those. How do you subvert that trope to be your style?
All right, so completely changing track on that.
You go down a row in the spreadsheet.
No, so subverting the tropes. Here's a fun thing that I get annoyed a lot of the time because a lot of the time a new author will come in with like, I'm going to completely change the game, and the reality is it's really hard to change the game unless you know how to play it. And if you can't hit the genre expectations, you're not actually even writing in the genre, right? So you're writing some other sub-genre that is like the anti-hero to our genre, right? And so if you can play on them and subvert them in ways that are good and useful to the story or just like unique, that's cool. But if you're doing it just to be like the bad boy of this thing, it's just, I've never really seen that work out. So you kind of gotta know what you're doing before you change it up. So that's what I would say as advice to answer your question.
Subverting tropes isn't a purpose unto itself. You subvert tropes for a reason, specifically because you want to make a point, you think there's something interesting to be said, you think this subversion might be more exciting, might be more compelling than the core version.
Yeah, I always hesitate a little bit for subversion because when it's done incorrectly, it feels like the author has broken the rules, and I dislike that when I'm reading as a reader. So I don't usually actively seek out to subvert tropes, just to subvert them, but I am a big fan of when an author plays in the rules and somehow subverts the expectation, right? So if they say like, oh, the magical creatures give you a magical power, but then somebody has a magical creature that gives them access to more magical creatures, like normally only people can bond with one, but then there's a creature that lets you bond with a whole bunch, and I'm like, oh, that was a fun subversion, because it still technically fits into the rules. The creature grants you a power, this creature's power just happens to be meta, right? Like it allows you to bond with more creatures. So I'm like, oh, that was fun. Like that was a fun subversion, I'm here for that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you need to be careful with it. If you just subvert it to just subvert it, I feel like a lot of readers get angry. If you tell me your MC is OP, I want him to be an OP. I don't want him to secretly be a pansy, right? Like, I would hate that. So, yeah, you got to be careful when you subvert tropes.
Yeah, I'd agree 100%. Reader expectation is just sort of the most important thing in a book, because if you don't meet reader expectation, you break immersion and you create friction for the reader that they're not going to want to continue reading. I find a lot of times mixing tropes to be better than trying to subvert a trope. And so taking two tropes that are maybe, I mean, they can be parallel or they can be opposed. It doesn't matter. But taking two tropes that you can then weave together, you really have an infinite number of combinations of new tropes that are super familiar to people because they understand all of the pieces, but they've just never seen them put together in that way, in the context of your story. Right? So a lot of times when I'm looking to subvert a trope, what I'm actually doing is introducing a new trope that mutates, right? That changes something and introduces new reader expectations in a way that's like, oh, this is cool. I'm excited for what's going to happen next. I'm interested to see, right? You're creating a story hook through the introduction of a secondary trope. So I'm very much on that boat of be very careful when you subvert a trope, because it's a lot easier to break trust than it is to gain trust. And once you gain trust as a writer, you absolutely want to make sure that you are not breaking that trust, because your readers are not going to come back.
So I agree with all that, but I write very differently. I build my worlds ridiculously in depth, and then I kind of mostly pants in that world. That I have everything established. The thing is, as you're pantsing, or as I'm pantsing, I tend to, like, I kind of get into a, and this is weird, I get into a trance and I kind of just go. And the words just flow. And for me, I don't think I've ever deliberately sought to subvert a trope in my life. I don't mean to, but I know I have, and I love twists. And if you hit it right, like you'll get goosebumps, you're like, whoa, I didn't think about that, but you've just done it. And so you go along with it. And if it happens in an organic way that brings your story to kind of another level, that's, oh, I'm giving myself goosebumps now. Or I'm not getting enough oxygen, one of the two. Yeah, I feel like if you do it in an organic way, without deliberately saying, oh, I'm going to be clever and I'm going to do this, I feel like that comes through as like a fake trope subversion. But if it happens organically in your story and it just naturally evolves the storyline further to your end point, those are the great ones.
I think the quickest way to receive a rejection letter from Athon Books is to tell us that you have something that no one's ever done before. Because I will show you 1,000 books that didn't sell that did that, right? We know what our genre is. I think it was Dakota that said if you wrote something out, like you're not actually writing in that genre, you're writing in a different genre. And so like when we're, especially as a publisher, we're like, hey, we publish LitRPG, we publish progression fantasy. Like if you wrote a progression fantasy where the character doesn't progress, you're not writing progression fantasy. Or if it's a character that digresses, it's not progression fantasy. It's something entirely different. And I think that one of these I can't think of the word, a thing that happened a lot during a period of time was the superheroes are evil, right? Like everyone thought they were doing this brand new thing. You had Brandon Sanderson doing Steelheart, you had The Boys, you had Invincible. It wasn't new, it was just, it's not superheroes anymore. Listen, The Boys is not superheroes. I love The Boys. Invincible maybe did it the best, right? I've been reading Invincible since day one, and the show everyone got introduced to, we had one episode where it was the Justice League, and then shoot, at the end, sorry, spoiler, they're evil, right? But in the comic book, I think we went through 6 or 7 issues before we discovered that it wasn't a Justice League ripoff. And I know Ryan Otley and I know those guys, and like people fell off because they thought, oh, this is just a ripoff. I stuck with it and I went, holy sh, that was like the greatest twist of all time when all of that happened. But it's not new anymore. So how do you do your own spin on it? And then The Boys did a phenomenal spin on it. So, I don't know, I agree with you that if you're not writing the trope, you're not writing the trope.
So in regards to that, LitRPG has some fairly defined tropes. What are your favorite defined tropes in the genre? To make LitRPG LitRPG.
Oh,
Yes. I was going to start with Seth because I knew that was going to be the answer.
And for me, it is as a publisher, it's whatever's selling right now. If I'm being like brutally honest with you, right? If I'm picking up new projects, it's going to be what's selling right now. And so yeah, OP is still moving. It's still doing really great. My personal favorite is Animal Companions. Every book I ever write accidentally has an animal companion.
Accidentally.
It really does. When I set out to write the Black Bash series, which is not LitRPG by the way, it's a weird Western, I didn't even actually consider going into it that my cowboy probably has a horse, right? But by like chapter 1, the horse has a name, and it doesn't talk or anything, but like it is a character, and I'm like, freaking A, now everyone's gonna love this character called Timperina, which is a silly name, but like everyone loves Tim. And
to be a temporary character.
No. Lovely answer. I have no idea where I came up with that name. But the Roach dies in Witcher, and we keep kicking that idea. Does Tim finally die? And everyone thinks Tim's gonna die. I'm gonna let you know if you're in the room right now or listening. Tim's not gonna die. We can't kill her. But we keep telling everybody how old she is and how she's not doing great. And everyone's like, he's like, she's gonna die, she's gonna die. There's my subversion, she's not fucking dying.
I just realized when he said that, I have animal companions too. I went, oh, I do that. To read, I love OPMCs. I really do. I just suck at writing them. But I love them. I read them. I seek them out. I love the journey. I love going, oh yeah, oh, power up, yes. I mean, who didn't? I mean, I watched Dragon Ball Z a lot. Woo! And over 9,000 and those freaking 45 episodes in a capsule while they're powering up, waiting to fight people. I just...
Hey, if you have a reader telling you that you have an OP character, just accept that you have an OP character.
Arguably, both of the 80s main characters can be considered OP.
Armor is OP.
Not Seth?
I do have a specific trope that I actually love more than OPMC, and I think LitRPG can do it a lot, and that is the main character having to decide if they're a human or a monster. And so it's really tightly associated with OPMC, because as you become overpowered, you start to question, or the people around you start to question your humanity. And so I think that's a really important LitRPG trope is, am I a human or am I a monster?
I've talked about the familiars a bunch, but it's not actually my favorite trope in the genre. My favorite trope is the hard work beats everything else. I really, really like when main characters exert themselves, train forever. You know, maybe they don't have the best power, but by golly, are they going to use it to their most bestest efficiency? I think it just speaks to me personally. You know, I don't want to go into this, and I'm okay, but I did grow up very poor and in a very rough situation, and everybody I knew around me was poor or doing very badly. My brother is a meth dealer. I mean, he was because he's in prison, or I think he got out of prison now. We don't talk. I don't talk to a lot of my family because of this kind of stuff, but everybody assumed that I would also be like all these other people, but I feel like hard work overcame. I went to college. Nobody in my family ever went to college. I went to law school. I'm a full-time author now, you know, like that kind of thing, and it's only because of hard work. So when I see that kind of stuff in books, it really resonates with me. And that's one of the reasons I love LitRPG, because I feel like in LitRPG, I mean, even if the MC is OP, he's still training hard. He's getting extra OP. You know what I'm saying? Like, I like that mentality. I like the mentality that you can overcome. You can get better, and even if you were given a terrible hand, you can make it work. So that's the kind of stuff that really gets me going.
And you kill monsters, you level up, and that's hard work being directly rewarded.
Well, experience is just the numerical representation of all of your hard work, right? Like, so I it's just my jam. Like, I'm here for it.
Quantifiable hard work.
Yes.
I'm particularly partial to when the protagonist, through his own wits and the right bit of cleverness by the skin of his teeth, manages to defeat something that is vastly more powerful than they are, and then there's just the burst of 15 level ups all at once.
I call that the MacGyver trope.
So I don't know about you guys down on the other side, but when like it's coming toward me, it's like, oh my gosh, don't say what I'm gonna say. Oh my gosh, I don't say what I'm gonna say. So when he's like, oh, it's something I see in LitRPG, I was like, okay. For me, one of the things that people don't think of as a trope very often, but really actually is, because it turns into a reader expectation. That's what a trope is. Book size, right? Like, books are trending larger and larger because people love audio, and they love to spend a credit from Audible and get a 40-hour book. And it's like, son of a gun. On our side. So it's one of those things where book size can be a trope all on its own, right? And so you start seeing these books trending larger and larger, 200,000, 300,000. And I'm like, I'm going to stick right at 115 to 120 every time and just hope for the best. But for me, that's built into my brand. It's like I have approximately the same size book for every book that I have, and I just put them out faster. And then the second trope I have is, kind of was already mentioned, was the kind of the obstacle is the way sort of trope, where it is like, hey, the whole point is to be able to overcome these obstacles that are in your way. So that is the way. And so that quick thinking, the getting stronger, the overcoming the obstacles, like who doesn't need more of that in their life, right? Who doesn't need like that willpower to go and do it? I don't know if he's here.
So we'll ask one more question here, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience for about 15 minutes. If there was a trope you could see from outside the genre, that what would you like that trope to be to pull into the genre and become genre defined? We'll start with Dakota.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, so let's see, being mass market. I don't know. No, so something outside the genre. So a lot of the time, I look at other genres and I say, I especially look at our sister genres. So that's like military science fiction. It's sci-fi. It's superhero. It's action adventure, swords and sorcery. And then I'm like, what are they doing that we aren't? And kind of the cool thing is that we're LitRPG. We're the cranberry juice of writing. We can go with anything. Like cranberry apple juice, great. You like apple juice? That's wonderful. Hey, you like orange juice? Cran orange, wonderful, right? And so we can just latch on to any of those things and drag them in the kicking and screaming. So if I were going to say one thing that I would really want to say, man, that's a really tough question, so thanks for dropping on me. One thing from another genre, I would say we have a fantastic amount of like system and like story-based stories, or novels, but I'm really liking to see the character-driven stories be more and more pulled in, because so a trope there would just be like, hey, a focus on the character and their journey and how they're doing things like as a person and how they're interacting with people around them. So specific one thing is I really am pushing for this in my next series, which is why it's on my mind, but is positive male interactions, right? Like really positive male, like bonding. You're not going to be betrayed by your buddies. You're not going to do these other things. You're going to have someone whose shoulders you can stand on and reach the next height. Because I think a lot of the time we have these solo main characters that are really suffering hard and alone, and that is just unfortunately not realistic, because no man is not. So that's something I'm going to be exploring in the near future.
LitRPG characters don't kiss the homies goodnight, and it really shows. This might be a controversial thing. I'd like to see more romance in the genre.
Oh, yes.
Enemies to lovers.
Lovers to better lovers.
I think we're still a somewhat young genre, but a lot of more traditional fantasy I know tends to have some kind of romantic subplot, and a lot of LitRPG authors love. A lot of LitRPG.
There is a lot of smut.
It's not romance.
Write smut, look for smut, write relationships as something the protagonist wins, rather than as an actual connection between two human beings. And I would
think healthy relationships would be nice to see.
Oh, that.
Are healthy relationships a trope?
Yes, actually.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, there you go.
I think they should meet in the game and get married.
Katie's projecting again.
I guess a trope that I like seeing, that I see a lot in science fiction, that I don't think I see a whole bunch in LitRPG because it goes in the opposite direction, like what Seth said, is a character that isn't human, that wants to be human. So like Data from Star Trek or something like that, where he's an android and he's attempting to be human. We do have a lot of LitRPG where it's like a human that becomes a monster, or they become something else that is not human. But I would really love to see more of the character from the outside that wants to be human, because I always really empathize with those guys. I really love them.
I want to see the opposite, where a monster at first is like, I want to become humanized, and then they accept their monster self and just destroy it.
Yeah, well, that's the subversion, right? Yeah, but I really love, a monster, a robot, anything, if they want to be human, I'm always rooting for that character. I'm like, you can do it.
This is a really hard question to answer.
just because.
That's why I made it the last one.
Yeah. I mean, partly because LitRPG you can just write whatever you want. Like as long as you have the progression elements, as long as you have the system elements, as long as you have the markers of this is LitRPG, your trope set is infinite. You can use tropes from anything. Or something.
Or everything.
Or everything. I do think that the first person to properly crack romance tropes in LitRPG is going to make so much money that I don't really know. Like,
It's blowing your mind, just thinking about it.
No, it actually is because.
Great, now you're doing like freaking romance LitRPG.
So
45,000 words in, Steve.
You're on a dating show and you're leveling up your dating ability.
I actually have a.
Oh, okay.
I have a
There's a lot of Japanese stuff like that.
Regency romance fantasy planned for this particular reason.
How long actually wrote a romance
Yes.
game?
Level up love.
And again, I think that it's going to take somebody doing it in a way that none of us have figured out yet.
What are you trying to say? You didn't do it right?
I'm saying yes, really. But I think that there's, there are all of these markets that exist right peripherally next to us that we borrow tropes from really heavily. I just wrote, Valentine's Farm is a Western fantasy, right? And one of the comments that I get the most from people who've read it is, oh, I loved Westerns. And then I read this and it felt so comfortable, right? And so tropes are such a great way to just make people who read outside of the genre feel comfortable in the genre. And the cool thing about LitRPG is once you start reading it, you stop reading everything else, right? And so,
Welcome to the dark side.
yeah, exactly. And so I think this is a great question and one that we should all be trying to continually answer.
I love urban fantasy, like adore it. I will devour 20, 30 books in like 10 days because they're a lot shorter than LitRPGs. But I really, really, really wanted an urban fantasy LitRPG. Nobody else really, really, really wanted an urban fantasy LitRPG but me at the time. So I would love to see urban fantasy like wider represented in LitRPG because, and I mean that's a whole other mess of tropes. I know you've got the vampire one, so we're already getting there, right? But I'd love to see more of it because it's my jam.
Vampires masquerade.
Yeah. Well, I heard it said recently, and I would love to credit the person that said it, but I don't recall who it was, that LitRPG is not a genre, but it's a method of telling a story. And it's absolutely true because we can kind of pull from anywhere. I want to just agree with Dakota that, so I've written 40 books. Most of them are not LitRPG, and they're very traditionally written books that are, for me, very character-focused. And so this LitRPG that Red and I have coming out is very wildly character-focused, and I am concerned that the current reader base is not going to accept that just because it's not a currently done thing.
They're not quite ready.
What I would like to see pulled from other genres, actually, I'm the creative director of Athon. I've creative directed like 3,000 books, and every time an author comes to me and is like, I want a symbol-based cover, which is a trope, right? These are all tropes. It doesn't work in the genre. It works very sparingly in the cover, in the genre, or in the market. And so I would love to see that become more widely acceptable because there could be some really beautiful symbol-style covers.
What?
Hey, Shami's one of them. She asked me for it.
Yeah, I asked you, said
I'm like,
no.
hey, do you want to sell books? That was my answer. You want to sell books? And I'm like, I don't want to be the guy that breaks that market. Please, someone else do it.
Yeah, and you're like, somebody do it. I'm like, what?
Will White didn't even have a symbol-based cover when the book series really took off. So it's like, come on, people do it, please.
That was fantastic answers. I wanted to give you guys a hard one at the end. Now let's open it up to people in the audience to come up and ask a question. Keep your questions to about 15 seconds. If they are directed at one or two panelists, let's keep that going as well. I have a feeling we're going to have quite a few questions to get through, so that if we can direct them a little bit, let's do that.
Do you think there's a market for educational LitRPG? LitRPG within desire to educate?
I think that's called a math book.
I'm educated about what?
Excel for dentists.
Or any topic. LitRPG is bringing formulas and other things that previously weren't seen in entertainment. Like Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, he was told that if for every formula you put in there, you'll have your sales. And LitRPG seems to me like it's kind of broken down that barrier.
So there's an interesting organization that uses games for therapy, and I think LitRPG could be a really good asset to them to create stories that are specifically designed for therapeutic purposes. That stuff is really early days because I don't know any clinicians who are writing LitRPG. But if there was a crossover where a clinician was writing LitRPG, I could absolutely see it being a possibility.
So you mentioned you talked about sort of the subversion of tropes versus playing them straight, and I was wondering where you sort of draw the line between subversion, satire, and parody.
I feel like with satire and parody, you really have to know the trope. Like, you can't do that correctly unless you are very, very familiar with it, right? Galaxy Quest is a great movie, but it was clearly written by people who super duper love Star Trek, and they knew all the Star Trek tropes, and then that way they can play with them and make them funny and hilarious, right? I guess the real line for me is your mastery of the trope. You can only get to these funny parts if you can accurately point out or poke fun at the trope itself. So just like subverting a trope, I would hesitate to make a parody of it unless you really know what you're doing. So.
Then again, generally all is forgiven if it's funny.
So I'm one of those people that read 50,000 books in other genres and then started reading y'all's books last year, and I've not read anything really else since. So my question is, this is something that I've kind of observed as a person who aggressively reads, is that I feel like because people play video games, because people read isekais, and then these people also then were the kids who read 30,000, Lord of the Rings tomes because they wanted to. I feel like with this, novels, you kind of have to guess where the progress is. You guys have the system built in, and I think my specific question is, how much of the visibility of the system needs to be available to the character? Because I've seen some where the character is unaware of the system until certain things are unlocked, but I've also seen it where the system is extremely available and readily visible to both the character and the reader. So I'm interested to see, at what point do you think the character needs to understand the system that they're in?
I would say as much as you want the reader to know.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I think you need to answer that question for us.
Yeah, so really, everyone votes with what they read, right? So if more people are reading, anyone can, pick up a book, want to read it, but are they going to book 2, are they going to book 3, are they going to book 4? And then we, make a study of those and we say, what is it about this series that people are drawn to and attracted to? And if it's like a core of the book is spreadsheets, most people aren't into that. I would be, but most people wouldn't be. And so it's just over and over, just A/B testing, fine-tuning down to see what people really want. And so that's really just kind of the answer is the reader tells us how much they want to see down the early round. Is your last name Price? Is your last name Price?
No.
No? Okay. I found someone's wallet and I turned it in. I want to make sure they got the wallet.
So to some extent, tropes are about expectations. That requires prior knowledge on the part of the reader. If you're building around tropes, to what extent are you risking making it less accessible to people who have just entered the genre, as so many are?
A lot. So the harder you hit a trope, the more targeted the book is. If you want to write fiction that is accessible to everybody, people inside the genre and outside of the genre, and I think you've actually just hit on something that we're starting to become more aware of. We originally wrote LitRPG for people who read LitRPG. We're starting to write LitRPG for people who love books, right? People who love stories. And so being able to give more information and not just be like, well, everybody knows how this works. Everybody understands how systems operate. Everybody, without that info dumping, like, well, here are 6 pages on how a system is built and works. Finding that line, I think, is super important. But there is an extent to which the more committed you are to a trope, the harder it is for somebody who is not familiar with that trope in the first place to pick it up and read it. Thankfully, because we borrow very heavily, because LitRPG is a style choice and not an actual genre in and of itself, we borrow so heavily from other types of fiction, other genres, that we get better crossover than if you were, say, writing a cozy mystery. Right? Those are hyper-specific tropes. You either hit them or you don't hit them, and it decides whether you're in the genre.
But you can do a cozy LitRPG.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do, a cozy mystery LitRPG.
Yeah.
You can. So LitRPG is more of a style choice, sort of what Steve was saying. It's more of a style choice than it is an actual genre.
We have about 9 minutes left, so let's keep questions.
I'll make this quick. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so I've heard you guys talking a lot, so subversion of tropes, current tropes, what you hope to see in the future. But as the genre is starting to become more mainstream, do you guys think, well, we're a couple of steps removed from certain tropes that were very popular because they were more relatable and familiar, easier to connect to audiences that had never read a LitRPG. For example, and I'm going to point to you because you've adapted it wonderfully. So you started with the Dungeon Core, you had the VR MMO, and now you don't write those two, you've moved on. But for new readers, but do you feel that new readers might come in and suddenly want an influx of those original subgenres, big tropes that define, these stories?
I feel like there is so much VR LitRPG out there that if they come in and go, I want a VR, like Sword Art Online, we have so many choices still available to them. And if for some reason that were to suddenly flourish again, then I'm sure we'd find writers for it.
Cool.
I don't feel like just because it's not the mainstream anymore, that they're never going to exist again. Because it's always evolving and it's always changing and it's what the readers want, and if they want it again, people will write it. That was like a circle of life.
Those old stories also haven't gone away. They're still there. The Amazon algorithm doesn't necessarily push older books forward in front of people, but they are still out there.
Yeah. Cool.
I try to never write the same theme twice. So that's kind of like as I'm sure Steve can tell you, we do a pretty in-depth analysis of what the next couple of years we think are going to look like, right? So we have all sorts of analytics groups, I assume that you're also part of these, that are analyzing the market in terms of everything from demographics to tropes to everything in between. And so I'm writing what I love, but I'm tailoring it to what I think is going to be actively popular at that moment. You'll notice my Cooking with Disaster series came out at the exact same time as Delicious in Dungeon, right? Because across the board, we have this data that says we think this is going to be it, and I'm not the only one that has access to it, or else I'd be like Matt Dinniman, right? But one of the things is, as I mentioned, we can adapt fast, and that's one of the great things about our genre is we can just keep writing, and we just make books happen.
And this happens in every industry, right? You see, two companies doing the exact same thing at the same time because they both figured out what that thing is. Dinniman's going to create a new desire for people to have dungeon crawlers. It's going to happen. Does that mean that those of us who have been writing forever are going to decide we want to jump on that bandwagon? Not necessarily, but you might have an influx of new writers who do that. So yeah,
Can I push back a little bit on this? I actually think that there.
I did not expect this much discussion.
I actually think that there are tropes that are time bound.
Mhm.
And they existed in the genre because of the particular circumstances in which they were born.
Mhm.
So MMO tropes are a part of that. Gamers don't play MMOs the way we played MMOs, right? It is a new generation of gamers, and so the tropes that we use, there are universal tropes that will exist forever because they're part of the human experience. And there are time-bound tropes that have very specific pieces to them that you only understand if you existed in the context in which they were born. Right?
Yeah, Rookie Series is based on Ultima Online. Raise your hand if, like, I know who's going to raise their hand because I can see how old people are.
I get it.
It was written for you and it's over. It's, you know.
Right.
Yeah, so you're saying that the key references will change.
Yes.
So you started talking about the distinction between genre and tropes. I was wondering about tropes versus memes, and the distinction there.
I love this topic.
Keep it short.
Okay. I'll keep it really short. A meme is just the iteration of a trope, right? So a trope is a certain it's like it's a subset of ideas, and a meme is an idea that is communicated and adjusted over time. But again, memes are all time bound. You have to understand the context of not only the original thing, but the evolution of the thing, and all of the references that the meme pulls in.
God, you're such a nerd.
So,
Just spit on that thing, man. Let's go.
So meme-based writing is the ultimate in time-bound writing. And so it is actually impossible for people who are outside of the structure to understand it.
Which is also really hard to put it in a book and have it not turn into just spoiled milk in like a year.
Yeah.
That is exactly right, because people get tired of the meme because they've already moved way past it. And so what happens is, if you write meme-based content, then you have to throw it away almost immediately, because by the time you write it, the new iteration of it has surpassed the old iteration of it. Right? And so that's why timeless themes and timeless tropes are a way better way to write, even though they're way less money.
Thank you.
Hi guys.
Hi.
So the thing about tropes is they can pretty much all be sent back to like, this is the first person who did it and whatnot. Is there anything in y'all's writings that you hope becomes tropes for later authors to use?
Libraries.
Let's go pretty short trope answers. And
No.
Yeah, I don't know how to.
Western philosophy and cultivation books.
Yep, fair. Well, I feel like knights or like being noble and good is already kind of in LitRPG. I mean, it flirts with it, like so. There, that's what I like.
I am always looking for the first mover advantage, right? I'm always looking for the thing that is just going to take what I'm doing to the next level. So yes, all of the freaking time. And that's why I have so many different series that explore so many different ideas. If one of them is just far and away blows everything else out of the water, I'm doing more of that, and or coming back to it in case of murder. So yes, all the time.
We have a minute and a half, Charles.
Okay, it's a very short one. How do you handle the issue, like maybe this is not applicable to you, but how do you handle the issue when you're setting up a trope and you have the reader's expectations built up, but the character's actions sort of contradict the landing of the trope? Do you try to push through to the landing of the trope, or do you try to like accept the fact that you're going to subvert the reader expectations?
All right, man, you're writing a book. That's the whole thing. So a lot of people disagree with me on this. Your character does not write your book. You write your own book, right? And so a lot of the time when people tell me, they're like, oh, the characters just do whatever they want to do. A lot of the time, and so for some people that is just true. They just have the voice in their head and they are just writing down what they see. That's cool. But for most people, they have a deep understanding of how people should be reacting to this thing, and their subconscious and their conscious mind are not in alignment, right? If you can't clearly state what you're going for, then your mind says, ooh, well, this is how it should actually be as you're writing. It's like, wow, the character took over. No, it's just that you have a deep knowledge of it, but you don't know how to say it clearly, right? If you can't say it and codify it, that's the disconnect, is you know what it should be, but you can't.
It's like a subconscious thing.
Yeah, specifically.
This is why I don't release books until I have multiple books in a series ready to go. Because if I get to book 3 and something changes and I go, I need to fix book 1, I can still do that. It's not out there. I want it to be the best thing it could possibly be.
And that's where we're going to draw, guys. Let's do one outro for everybody, where they can find you. We'll start with Steve.
JamieCastle.com, athonbooks.com. If you're in the vendor hall, please come see us. We're at 3500, which is on the 3rd level.
Any discounts today?
Honestly, come by at the end. I'll give you whatever you want.
That is a discount.
I will give you whatever. I am married, pretty happy, even at driving.